Hello, everybody. My name is Lance Johnson, and I want to welcome you to another edition of Amplify Your Business. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking all things e-learning. So what you need to know to start your e-learning program or transition to an e-learning program, all the tips and tricks and the things you should be avoiding, as well as the things, obviously, that you should be doing to make sure that you're successful. And today, we're going to have Gordon Sheppard from Expert Training Solutions on the call today so that he can give us all of his advice, all of his knowledge, so that we're doing it all right. Welcome to the show.
Lance, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. It's such a pleasure to connect with a colleague like yourself on this, what I think is a really important issue for so many corporations, associations these days, as they kind of try and make the jump into the new world. A lot of folks they're dabbling in certain areas. They've tried some social media. They've tried some things. They're thinking about e-learning maybe and this kind of thing. And they often don't have integrators like yourself, who I know, is an outstanding, not only sort of e-learning provider, but strategist. So it's like minds that are coming together. This conversation, I really appreciate it. I'm 53 years old now. I think I've learned more about sort of consulting and helping clients along the way, maybe from my teenagers, 19 and 16 these days, than anybody else, because they've helped me get through the crucial conversations that I need to be, able to help clients along the way. My adult education work goes all the way back to Access Television, when I worked in educational television, back when we had all the gear, we had all the experts, we had all the ways to put it together. This is back in the early 2000s, late 90s, this kind of thing. And having gone through that experience, it's funny, a good story is a good story, but then all the technology changed. And these things that have dragged these clients forward, kicking and screaming in a sense for many of them, some are proactive, but many are not, into this new world. There was a way they were used to doing things, and they used to go to providers like I would have been back in the day, and you drop off your money and you get like a corporate video, or you get an educational piece, and there's a lot to do in terms of how to distribute it. Well, now we've got all this affordable tools and opportunity and all kinds of things. And I think anybody that's like I'm going to say a CEO, an executive director, they're trying to essentially integrate all of this good information. So, blast forward a couple of years later, here I was, finished out that TV career, eventually was the manager of creative services, running 3 crews. We're doing all kinds of things around corporate communications. And then I got out into my independent world and worked as a strategy consultant for many years. But I found when I was doing the strategy work with the clients, the issue when we got into the marketing communications area in this e-learning piece was that many of them hadn't considered it, or they had kind of gotten ripped off maybe by somebody in the past, or they had created an asset, again, same thing like a corporate video or an e-learning piece, and they didn't kind of know where to put it. Yep. So I got into this really interesting sort of moment that I'm at in time right now, where I generally walk with the senior leaders in a given situation. I can advise them from all the different areas, whether it's them dealing with their teenagers or their staff or whatever you want to call it, all the way on through to making sure that that strategy comes together, and that their e-learning that's created by someone like yourself goes as far as it can, and that they've really optimized it. Because again, the other piece that's happening, I think, for so many of these leaders in their area is they have to work with a variety of vendors, but it's very difficult for them because they're good at what they do, their specialty, but it's really hard to get a handle on how to be good at all the pieces that go together. And I think what's neat these days, again, back to affordability of tools for the work that I do, you can teach somebody to fish, or you can do the level of work that you do, which is a full integration with all kinds of, knowledge checks and making sure that it's tied into your human resources and doing that level of work that you're doing. And I love it because that spectrum allows you to test, be agile, and help those things to go forward. So actually, it's funny, I'm getting really excited about the conversation now, because I know there's that moment when I walk in to deal with people when they don't know what's possible, and then they start to see what's possible. And if you can get someone to sort of guide you along, I would say maybe I'm Yoda in this situation to your Luke Skywalker, and I'm helping to be that guide at that moment to say, well, now's the next step, and now's the next step. And I've had moments when I actually pull out the to-do list, the actual to-do list of what could be done for an organization. Yeah. Right away, the senior leaders are overwhelmed, but it's also part of why when they don't know these things in terms of need to know, it's very difficult for them to guide their people and get them through a successful process of development, production, marketing, and all the way out to maintenance on the other end, and really making sure that it happens. And I'll go back to that piece I was trying to mention about the budgeting. It's a neat time. You can get a little camera, a laptop, and probably get something pretty good done and out the door. Maybe even with your phone, you can get something happening. So that's really a good way to spark innovation for organizations. And then again, this pleasure to hang out with someone like yourself who's done it before, been there, led people through sort of serious training, endeavors to make sure that it actually impacts their organization in the right way, gets their people moving on the training side in the right way. I just love the conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You can tell that you've got a lot of enthusiasm for this subject, and that's why you're successful doing what you're doing as well. And so one of the things that I think that we might want to start with is just that question as to why. Why should organizations consider doing their training programs? And when I talk about organizations, I'm talking about corporations as well as, say, associations. So professional associations, or it could be, non-professional associations, but organizations that are trying to train either employees or a membership group. What would be the reason, in your opinion, or multiple reasons, as to why people should be shifting to an online environment or experience versus the more traditional face-to-face learning?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember part of the spark for me a couple of years ago when I started then to go heavily into this area of my work came from, you'll hear these fatigue statements for a client. Like on the association side, they're like, hey, we used to give these workshops, they're evening workshops. I don't know why we're not getting as many people attending now. Or you'll get the, on the corporate side, you'll say, well, we spent a big pile of money on a corporate training program, and it included e-learning and all those things, but we only did it once, and then it's sitting there on the shelf, right? Yeah. And so these reasons to get into it and get into it kind of in the right way are so beneficial in so many different ways. I can't remember the stats, but let's just say on average, in your sort of Fortune 1000s in the United States, for example, they're spending about $100 a month on employees. I could pull up the stat, but this is the idea of, per employee. And I think many organizations aren't doing even that level. Do you know what I mean? They're just sort of, a lot of it is reactionary. It's as needed. But certainly, one of the primary benefits of training in either of these environments is you're either helping your members to get a benefit in the situation, or you're helping, again, your employees to go further, faster. And funny enough, for the corporations, if you can get the rhythm of e-learning for your employees, it's a simple jump to go to that next level of marketing by taking that same process and putting it into something that you're going to do for your customers. This is way beyond a 30-second commercial or an explainer. This is taking them to that next level. And we've seen all kinds of examples. So I would say, your employee enhancement and retention, which is pretty obvious, but we've been doing it in that sort of way that we were used to. You have that big corporate meeting, throw a bit of COVID in there.
Yeah.
Can't get together. I can tell you, I do live training, right? And I'm now that's sort of put off for how long? Like when's that going to come back? I've got people that are like 2021, maybe, big asterisk, question mark. Yeah. So not only were people maybe not as far ahead in this game as they could have been on the corporate side and doing that kind of thing, now they're in a jam because they've got to ramp up really fast. So I think when I get on with sort of solid providers like yourself, and I'm like, oh, there's a good referral for someone that you can responsibly get involved with to do that kind of thing. So certainly we know that it's important for, again, the employees, and on the membership side, I think blended learning is probably the phrase that goes into these things. They've got the expertise, these organizations. They know what they're doing. They've been doing the teaching for a long time. But now there's this sort of, there's a couple things going on where they have to internally transition that expertise out into the world in that sort of optimized way. So that's the other opportunity, is to actually start to enhance. And you'll see this, I've seen this before. You've got a current boomer leadership in many of these private organizations, for example, and they're used to doing things a certain way, and they like the newsletter and they like advertising in the newspaper and whatever they liked to do before. Now what they need to learn to do is allocate budget to this newer process. And you'll see 30-year-olds, 25-year-olds that are punching from mid-levels in the organization. They're coming up with these great ideas. But again, this integrated approach, which is really necessary. So another benefit to doing the e-learning process is to helping those people actually to get super engaged and actually get them rolling out. And the nice thing when we talk about manage up, manage down, the opportunity for the senior leaders is to allow themselves to be managed in this area. Don't say, I'm not going to get on social media and I'm not going to deal with this e-learning thing and I'm done. Say, how can I do this, and where within the organization do we have the capacity that we need to get started? And then again, getting back to providers, who do we bring into the situation to bring it forward? So there's that. The other piece too is differentiation. I don't think organizations can get away from putting in an e-learning program or training program that isn't simply the best to be competitive in your own marketplace. And if you're at that moment where you're hiring somebody and you're going to actually be real about, when we bring you here, we'll bring you in with a certain level, but then we're going to train you as needed, and look at our e-learning progression. Yep. Now we're going to say something like Google, any of the Silicon Valley, some of them are doing this in spades because they can pour tons of resources into this area. But when we're talking about your average corporation, how are they going to spend their limited budgets in this area? I think that's a big factor in terms of, as another way to sort of bring this forward.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point in terms of just setting yourself as an employer apart when you're talking about, or to an audience of corporate HR professionals, right? When it really comes down to, the recruitment and all the talk that we do around our people are the most important, right? There's some organizations that actually live that, and there's a lot of organizations that where that's just lip service, and the people aren't necessarily the most important, but they should be. And so this is one way of really proving that we are going to have a program in place in which we're going to grow you as an employee so that you can, have the career that you're destined to have, essentially. Now,
Well,
some of
and
the
the
things,
type and the type of corporation that's successful in this area is the one that really is walking the talk.
yeah,
And that what they're going to do, because I know we're going to get to this question because everybody always wants to know, what's the budget for an e-learning project?
yeah,
I think it's a before, during, and after. The before is the cheapest part of the whole conversation. It's the planning
yeah,
phase. It's that thing where you can really get stuff up on those whiteboards and get ready. And then because people don't know the process, and again, I'm so excited to be here today to talk about any part of the process that people want to hear about, there's sticker shock, right? Someone
yeah,
like you or me is sitting across the desk, and at some point they're like, you know what? It's $30,000. It's $15,000. It's $100,000. Like there are these amounts that actually are commensurate with depending on the project levels that you want to get to.
yeah,
We have to then really just sort of, I would say for anybody watching this type of material, just take a big breath in when you start to hear the numbers game and be aware that, again, it's before, during, and after. The during is execution, of course, before is the prep part, and then that after piece, really, really important to have a maintenance scenario in place as well to make sure that your whole program is going to be successful over time. But I like that you're saying, these best practice companies are the ones who are they're the ones that will really absorb this and execute on it.
yeah, most definitely. And so some of the other things that come to mind when I think of e-learning versus just traditional learning or face-to-face or seminar-based learning is there's the advantage of not having, like you mentioned, the COVID crisis that we're in right now. To give some context to everybody, if they're watching this at some future date, when we're recording this today, it's the beginning of June 2020. And so we are just at the stage in which we're reopening our economy from being, kind of locked down. But that reopening, we still have some restrictions in terms of the number of people that can be gathering at once. And so from a training standpoint, that's definitely going to restrict that. So, I mean, it's quite obvious that if you've got a big workforce that needs to be gathering to receive some sort of training, e-learning is definitely a great solution for that because they don't have to. But even if you don't, even if we're past this COVID situation, there's a lot of companies that have been shifting to an e-learning environment because they might have a distributed workforce that's maybe stretched across the province, stretched across the country, or international. And so it allows that training to occur in the same kind of environment. The same type of information is provided to each and every one of those employees, depending on obviously on what their job role might be. But they're all getting the same training, and they're getting it, quickly, remotely from wherever they're at. It's 24/7. So the learner can learn when they want to learn, which is something that we hear all the time. Is we want to have as employees and as members, and that access to content when we need it or when we want it. We don't necessarily want to be sitting in front of a screen for 4 hours doing e-learning, but we might prefer to do it in half-hour increments or hour increments, or you slide it in between certain tasks or at different times throughout the day, so you're not consuming a whole day to do a big training module, as an example. So that flexibility is just inherent in the technology and in the deployment of e-learning. Any other advantages you can think of?
Well, you're getting to one right there, which is just in time, right? That just in
Yeah,
time environment that we're in. So if it's me when my shower head breaks and I go on YouTube and I see a video and I buy a $32 part and I save $300, I mean,
yeah,
this is what another opportunity for the corporations that take on providers. Again, I'm going to say like yourself, who can not only, it's one thing to do a big signature course. This is where people get into a trap. They're like,
yeah,
we're going to do this big rollout. It's 5 modules. We're going to do all this research. And we're going to roll this out. It's going to be the bomb. Where it is now, in the same way that we've had to be agile with our workforce, and a lot of those office towers in downtown anywhere are having to empty out, and we're going to see, what, a 30% reduction in downtown office space because people are going to be doing just what we're doing right here. This
yeah,
just-in-time learning thing, and I'm going to say micro-learning or whatever that is, the ability to enhance your e-learning investment and working with the right teams is not getting stuck on the big project where you do it once, and then again, if you haven't promoted it, it's not used enough in the way that you want it to be. you've got that kind of flexibility. So you're just sort of dipping into that content area there in a sense to start to help people to imagine not only, again, not getting sort of one size fits all, but being really, again, agile the way that the workforce is moving. And we're seeing also multi-generational learner differences, right? So we've got our 20-somethings and how do they want to take in information? And back to that blended learning piece, because you're 55-year-old who may need some pretty important information. I was with someone the other day, CEO of a company, and I said, boy, you're not listening to your digital specialist at all. So how do we bridge the gap so the CEO gets what they need to know so they can invest in digital marketing? This could be a micro-learning opportunity where they actually sort of stoke something up pretty quick. But if it's tied into programs, again, I'm going to say back to what you guys do and develop, then suddenly you're not just getting stuck. You've got a lot of options when the right provider's in the room, and you're able to then get those pieces out that your people need either just in time, or if it's one of those pieces where it's gated, right? And we've got to get through knowledge checks and specific learnings, and especially in areas like safety or anything of that nature, that also has to be a deep consideration.
Yeah, completely. And I want to go back to, you were talking a little bit earlier about budget and that too. And so just the cost of training in general can be quite onerous on organizations. But like you also mentioned at the top, the technology now has gotten to the point where it's actually quite easy to create content. So we can all be content creators, just as you and I are doing right now. And like you mentioned, it could be as simple as filming off of a smartphone. They're pretty good nowadays. And so you can create some content actually inexpensively, and then you can, put that into, there's various online e-learning platforms that you can load it into and create courses from. And so the cost to create this is actually, and to deploy it, can actually be significantly less than what it costs to do the typical workshop kind of face-to-face gathering of people, because especially if you've got that distributed workforce, which a lot of corporations do, and a lot of associations, just by their nature, tend to have distributed membership. And so to bring everybody into one centralized location, you're talking about travel costs, hotel costs, and so on. And then on top of that, you've got your trainer cost. So whoever's going to be delivering that, and the development of that course material and everything that goes along with it. Now, that development cost would be similar, but then the delivery cost, because you're going online, is a lot less expensive. And so the production of it, which used to be, you had to bring in this big camera crew and everything else, like what you were talking about your days at Access, right? Where all of a sudden you've got, 5 people that are on set filming, the subject matter expert and so on, where with all this fancy equipment, and you're talking about, potentially thousands of dollars a day in production costs, where now you can pick up an inexpensive DSLR or your smartphone, record that, and then hand that off to somebody who knows how to edit it, or you can use some apps to do some editing and create that content on the fly. So I think cost is a real advantage also to e-learning, where it used to be, I think, almost the reverse, right? Where the online learning was something that took a lot more budget in some cases.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it just depends on what your goals are as an organization, right? So you're right back to saying, do we want to do a little or a lot? But this early phase for anybody that's say on this, observing this right now, this is a great investment of your time. You're listening to experienced people talk about how to kind of get you from A to B in a sense to be able to get there. And when we're starting to hear numbers, and I throw numbers out pretty quickly in conversations these days, I think as a salesman, you're supposed to sort of hang on and whatever. I'd rather shock people up front in terms of what's in their heads. What I can say observationally is a lot of people simply haven't allocated in their internal budgets money for e-learning. Yeah. They don't have a budget. So when you talk to them for the first time, and this is real, and I say this as very openly, and I don't know if I'm betraying your process or whatever, I'm just saying in my experience, listen, if you're going to be dedicated to anything, and by the way, the hidden cost is your internal person man hours. Don't think you're going to get caught. So initially, you're pretty quickly, if you're going to get into anything that's substantial, right, that's really going to drive your business forward, because you've got a key performance indicator that you're like, we've got to achieve this goal in 90 days. I've got to ramp people up on this thing, this process, whatever that is. And the results of that process. So that, again, if you standardize your learning, I was speaking with someone who trains engineers, and they said, you know what, I used to fly around to all the cities in Western Canada. We would have the all-day hotel meeting, just like you're saying on the cost side. And I did that however many times a year to educate people on the new thing. And now they're simply delivering a webinar thing, except they were now baby stepping into webinars. They hadn't sort of, again, consulted with experts on how to do webinars.
Yeah.
And so I know one of my engagements came from the fact that some people said, oh, we've got trainers and we've got a video. And they went and did a Zoom recording like this. And then it was 2 hours long and they put it in 3 pieces on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they wondered why people didn't. I mean, it's great information. Again, the packaging of the information. So if you're in a sort of a situation like you described earlier, you've got your phone, you're going to be able to sort of edit yourself, get something out the door and get a feel, a taste for what that is. If that's what drives your key performance indicator, your goal, your strategy, perfect. Then that's what I think you need to do. Yeah. As you start to step up the scale on the cost side, now you're involving experts, people like us who come in and are able to listen to the situation, make recommendations. I can't say enough about someone going and I know Lance, just hire him. The value of bringing Lance into the situation to give you an honest evaluation and a staged, like, here's what you can expect, here's what it's going to look like. Super value. I know it's the same sort of part of why we're hanging out here is the same reason, same thing that I would do as well. Once you get that in place and suddenly you've got a trusted provider, that's the talk is cheap phase. And I think that's really valuable. And you just can expect thousands of dollars, in that sort of phase because the discovery can go anywhere from, I know in the process that I would have, it's you want to talk to the individuals in the situation. Who's your social media provider? Who's your current editor? Do you have them? Do you need to know who they are? That's a discovery piece. That all comes back to giving, maybe a bit of a dashboard to the client and they know the value of that discovery piece. At that point, I'll say hit a stop sign. Because then you're like, okay, if you really understand your strategy and you've allocated a budget, then immediately you're going to start to talk about what level of programming are we developing here. So, if we were talking about a mechanic who needs to learn a new process in a shop or something like that, maybe it's very defined and it's a short burst and we can get through that with like one expert and a camera and you're good to go. If it's like what you do in terms of, I'm sure you do all the different levels, but where you take them into modules, lessons, knowledge checks, and those things, simply just imagine the number of man hours. You'll hear technical writers start to say things like, I looked at your piece, I did an analysis. I think I'm looking at 200 hours. And then they can give you an hourly rate and give you a feel for just even the technical writing piece. The executive producing piece has a value. The camera operator there, if you're bringing those things into play, there's all kinds of things that start to come into play. But just getting back to your budget thing, it really relates back to, and I always say, if you put $1 in, you want to get $2 out. It doesn't matter what the process is. And that's the reason to work with great people. So if it's on that human resource side, we really need our key people to get this process, like a sales process, for example. But that if they get it in the way that you want, then they're going to go out and they're actually going to, improve your revenue. That's just an investment back into your business that makes e-learning super valuable. E-learning for e-learning's sake, I would just say don't do it, from my opinion. I'm not trying to do that type of work. I would say don't make the effort. But if you are going to make the effort and it's all tied to your strategic objectives, then those budget amounts are going to be just simply investments. So that's on the dollar side. So again, I would say the scale is starting at sort of 0. You do something yourself. You're getting into thousands for some sort of consultation from an expert like yourself that brings you into the reality of what you can expect. And then expect that rollout, by the way, not to take place in 3 months. Yeah. Really get ready for 6 to 18 months for like a full development and this kind of thing. The piece that people don't budget for is the knowledge transfer from the subject matter experts. And it's all shiny in that first conversation. Oh, it's going to be great. We're going to get our expert to talk to you. And then I'm putting it right in the contracts. I'm like, no, I need 60 hours of their time. And they're like, what do you mean 60 hours of their time? I'm like, hey, we got to translate it from, you could just shoot a video of them talking. And if you think it's good enough, that's fine. But if you're going to get into modules, lessons, breakdown, very thoughtful micro learning bursts, like I've got folks I know that suddenly you've got 80 lessons in there, but it's all been very well used. Then you've got a real opportunity. So don't underestimate the amount of time that it takes to get the knowledge from your subject matter expert out into the world in the right way with the right people. And then if you've got the right people in place, they're going to be giving you advice all the way down the road to little things that you didn't think about. What do you mean I've got to put some effort into doing a copyright document? Why do I need to get my legal covered? Why do I need to check my insurance costs in terms of exposure in this area? What do you mean I'm talking about property rights or intellectual property rights and this kind of thing? I mean, these are all factors that when you work with the right experts, you've got a good chance to be covered bumper to bumper. And again, back to best practice companies, they're doing this, they're building it in, but they need a guide. They need, again, I'm going to say someone like yourself who can guide them through all those pieces. All those check boxes get checked by the time they get out the door. Yeah. The other piece I'll get excited about is when I used to work in the TV business, we had the big crew, we the only go-to. What would happen is we do that VHS tape and drop it off on your desk. And then you come back in 3 to 5 years when something changed, and then you do a big investment again to get that whole process to happen again. When I'm mentioning modules and lessons, if you're smart at the front end, for example, let's say you're doing a safety course and legislation might change in the future. There's a way to work in the information where you're referring to the legislation, but you're not putting the literal legislation, for example, right into your video. So now when that legislation changes in the future, you've got a reference to something that can swap out very easily, say in a bibliography, and then you're not stuck on having to reproduce that material in the future. So those types of considerations, if you're really smart at the front end, it's a great opportunity then at the back end to not really take on a lot of additional costs, and then back to depending on which setup you go for. Let's just say it's almost like I have here, a couple lights, decent mic, you know, we've got a decent camera here and we can see each other. And maybe you got people that run into your studio and they do that, or maybe that you've got a laptop level, whatever your level of presentation is. That's all those tools are very low cost, front end kind of costs. Or you work with crews and you do it properly, or maybe even got a host or that kind of thing. But those those things that people don't typically think about, I'm going to say back to, again, transferring knowledge, keep those things in play. And then I can't say enough when we're talking budgets, just put a big contingency in there, as in just immediately add 30% to whatever, 30% to whatever you think it's going to cost, because especially if you're going through it for the first time, things will come up. And there's just that natural part of it as well. So if you've got that,
So I was just gonna say, I think that's a really great tip in terms of having like that contingency, because when we work with clients, oftentimes they've got, you know, they work out the budget and it's pretty fixed. And so they've got the approval, right, from whomever that they needed to get that approval to go forward with it. And then all of a sudden you have those contingency issues that come up. And so then they're either in a situation where they have to go back and beg for some more money because they now are doing a second ask, or we end up having to trim things that they wanted to have within the program or within the training module because they ran out of budget room. And in the budgeting for that, you know, those overages and those contingencies, I'd also say from a time standpoint, I don't know what your experience has been here, but you did allude to that it takes a while to get these things produced. I would say that you should be budgeting from a 30 to 50% contingency on the time to roll it out. So if you needed it done in, you know, say 6 months time, you want to be building out a plan that you're going to have it completed within 4 months from now, so that you've got a 2-month contingency just in case you have issues with the subject matter expert, you know, simple thing gets sick, right? And so then all of a sudden they're down for a couple of weeks and you have to wait and delay on that content creation piece of it. Or, you know, it could be a whole pile of different things that could happen. Where there's a shift in direction in the middle of it, which we see happen sometimes too. And this is where, you know, just to come back to, I think the value that you bring in as being that expert consultant that can come in and work with these clients and take them through that journey as to, okay, so this is what you're looking to produce, or you have a need here. And so let's talk about the strategy to get that completed. What are the things that you need to have in place so that then when we come in as the people who are developing it, all of those steps are well thought out of, and we don't have those shifts in direction, which can be really costly later on, because as they start to get into it, then they start coming up with new questions as to, okay, wait a minute, if I would have known that, I would have not done it this way. Can we change that now? And so then that turns into a difficult conversation at the time, because it can really increase the cost and delay the project as well. So I really value having somebody like you come in at the front.
Yeah, thanks for that reflection back. It's funny, I facilitate a lot of difficult conversations, and I just had one recently where it was, hey, let's do cool video on site as a piece to insert into our e-learning. The COVID situation just simply banned any possibility of going on site to shoot. Yeah. And that was eliminated. Now, it was a big wish list item in the front end of what we were doing, and then it just simply wasn't possible. So by working with experienced people who can be honest up front, and I'm a big fan of the honest upfront piece and helping people to set expectations. The other thing I'll say about for the clients, and this is I know my big challenge. It's one thing to get excited in the first meeting and the second meeting. You're just getting to know each other. You're dating. Once you get into the grind and you actually have to do the work, the trust that's needed up front, somehow there's a good opportunity for clients to invest in that trust quickly. Hard part is if they've been burned by a vendor before, they're in a tough spot, because they've already gotten a bad taste. I know as a consultant coming into situations, people are like, oh, I deal with consultants. Don't take off my watch and tell me the time, all those sort of old consultant jokes. And I don't mean to, I mean, how do you then, and this is a question for the clients that, or the people that are watching this right now. It's a question for them because how do you know to trust somebody? Well, referral, I think, is maybe the best case scenario, right? Someone's worked with someone before, they're going to give you this honest work. And then somehow not skipping that step to trust. And I realize this now as a provider, I'm pretty open about things. I'm like, we've got it, because there's going to be those moments that are actually, you can't discount the emotional factor. Mm-hmm. They get into that situation where they thought something was going to happen in 4 months, but then it's going to take 6. There's an emotional component to this that's actually a big part of what can slow things down or expectations. And I'm going to talk a little bit there on the soft side to say, how do you then as a client know your own blind spots coming into the situation so that you can then really make the vendor that you're working with successful? Yeah. This is a piece that cannot be skipped. You cannot skip trust, because these things where people have gotten burned, it happens all the time in the digital marketing space where money's changing hands. Clients coming in, they just want more business, and the digital marketer is going to say, yeah, I can do these steps for you that you'll never understand. They never tell you that part. And then if you got some clients, that's great. But if you didn't, you know what? You signed the thing with the big asterisk. That wasn't the internal pact. Yeah, they signed a contract. Maybe they read it. Maybe they understood it. Maybe they didn't when they signed the contract. This is this piece about being upfront, honestly. So we're setting real budget expectations. By the way, I hope I mentioned before, during, and after. We just talked about getting through the e-learning production. Inevitably, whether it's internal e-learning or external, there has to be a marketing and maintenance budget that's going to allow you to maintain your systems and get that to go forward too. So you can't forget about that in the budgeting process. And somewhere in there, I hope I alluded to as well, the resources that are needed to create an e-learning process are finite to a certain degree. So you can have your internal people, and this happens a lot. Suddenly, this one's happened to me, it's happened a couple times. I'll go into a situation, they say, oh, we've got the Adobe suite of software. Now, for people that don't know, that means, Photoshop, where you can edit your photos, and you've got Adobe Premiere, which is a really good editing system. And these are very robust tools that if you've got them in your organization, you can use them. They're great. But people frequently pay the money for the tools, but they don't set aside the time for their internal people to train on them and use them. And by the way, it's not a set it and forget it e-learning. There is an inevitable amount of internal maintenance that's needed, and certainly internal awareness. And that can be a little or a lot. You can have one of your internal people learn how to do some editing, or you can have them at least be aware so that when they're talking to an editor of what to expect. So these internal costs and external costs and the after side as well are a big factor. So you'll hear this other piece in there that are critical to this process. Learning management system that you mentioned before. You've got to be able to very quickly trust someone to educate you on, say, a top 3 that makes sense for your business at different price points and different bells and whistles. And then somewhere in there, you don't just get it for the first year. That's one of those ones where if you're investing in a program, you're hopefully going to do your research and get the right one that takes you through multiple years. And I was saying this actually to a client just today, which was, is that learning management system going to be around in 5 years? Yeah, that's part of the homework that goes into this as well. So you know that your program, depending on what you've invested in, is going to be there.
Yeah. And that's why we typically, when we're building out programs for clients, is we'll build the courses separate from what the platform, the LMS is, that they're going to deploy it on, so that if that LMS is ever, not something viable or something that they don't want to use in the future, it's not baked into the LMS, because there are the tools out there in which you can create the course content right within an LMS. But there you do run that risk. And so it's a good point that you...
well, I'm just going to jump into and translate what you just said for the people that I've been dealing with anyway, and just sort of take those terms and say, you need a full backup of all of your files. You're hearing this from your IT guy. You need a full backup of everything in case that system breaks. You always want to be like a week or 2 for being back up and activated with that material. So suddenly you're doing 2 things. You're putting this great set of learning into your own learning management system to deploy to your internal people, but you've always got that sidebar thing. And so that actually brings up another cost issue, which is storage, right? And again, it's all these little funny little line items that you don't anticipate in the early budget because you get excited about certain things. But that thing of storage down the road, really, really important. And then I don't know, folks, how deep you want to get down the rabbit hole. I often say you're about to get tired about what I'm going to say, but for people that don't know, if you're going to shoot video, for example, and you want it to have, be a larger file size, like what we hear 4K, like, so, people might know their 4K TVs. Suddenly you're dealing with big files. You need big storage solutions. That's got to be in a place that's going to be there all the time for the organization. And at that point, clients often start to drop off and they're like, okay, this is where the trust part comes in to say, well, how much do I really trust these people who are going to do the work to just simply go off and empower them to do their work, bring me back the deliverables that I need to know about, and then make sure that everything gets paid for. Now, if they want to learn your job, and I've had people try to do that, they'll try and stick with certain parts of the conversation, but just by nature, the clients are excited about what they're excited about. They're not actually excited about e-learning production per se.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. It's not typically a passion that people within organizations have got. It's left to geeks like us to geek out over e-learning for sure. So let's jump into a little bit more practical advice, because I always really love giving some practical, this is how you do it kind of steps to the audience. And so in this case, I'd love to hear from you. What are the practical steps when you sit down with a client? So somebody reaches out to you and says, you know what, I want to shift my training online, or I want to create training because I don't have anything existing right now, and I want to do that online. What do you do? What are the steps? What do you walk them through to get them to the place where they are ready then to have the content created?
Yeah, and it's funny because if we actually looked at the checklist of, well, you know this better than me, the checklist of what it takes to get e-learning from idea to the finish line, there's a lot of items in there. So I would say the first practical thing I would say to any client is get ready to set aside at least 3 to 5 discovery meetings. And that's the most practical thing I can say. Like my first meeting, if it isn't 90 minutes long with the key senior people engaged, and this is with, if it's a corporation, you've got maybe a chief learning officer, depending on the size of organization, they might bring in the CEO for this kind of conversation as well. You've probably got somebody from marketing in the room, somebody from IT. They want to be listening in on the conversation. In the discovery conversation, there's a bit of a back and forth component to saying, well, what have you done in the past? How did it go? What fatigue have you felt in that area? How do we get you started on getting moving forward? And then if you actually decide and you've actually got more focus and your e-learning project is kind of set, then you have to start to say, well, what strategic goal is it tied to? Is it going to drive that forward? And let's just immediately start to talk about some chunky budget numbers so that, again, people just get the number thing out of the way, like just whatever that's going to start to look like, and then start to work within those areas. And I don't mean to get into that swap thing of like, don't betray the budget and whatever. There's some level of need. If you want to train 100 employees on a certain program and you want it to be a certain level and a certain standard, you've brought some examples into the room. I want it to look like that. I need a host. I need these things. There are just simply costs to those things that you're going to have to deal with, down the road and figure it out. Plus those other learning management system things as well. So quickly it can get overwhelming, but I'm going to say in that first moment is, what is your goal with the education, right? What is that? How do you make sure you answer that? Who's it going to be for? And is it going to be $1 in, $2 out by the time you get through either getting actual money back for the training that you do, or again, employee satisfaction? So if you know those big goals, that's being discovered in that early conversation. There's a little bit of internal versus external, who's going to do it question. Do we have the people internally to do basic parts of this, or are we going full vendor in this case to do a full rollout because they've got the expertise and we need to rely on them to do that? So as you consider that, that's going to affect your costs. Again, don't dismiss if you assign people internally, put those into your costing. It's not, and then also don't make it work on top of their 40-hour work week. Don't say, oh, now you're going to do this too. Actually factor into their reality. So then we start there. Well, suddenly then you're boiling down to someone's got an idea for an education program. If we came up with an example, let's just say typically there's a lot of sales training, say, that would go on. So you've got a manager, they want their sales folks to know a certain process. Then you're getting into actually putting some, maybe what I would call a wireframe around the subject matter. And that's not saying all the details just yet, but you're basically kind of shooting for all the elements. When I say the wireframe, these are all the things it's going to take to actually produce it. When you get into then sort of a script in a sense, then you want to start to work towards what are the headers, the basic headers of these ideas. These are our 3 big ideas or 5 big ideas. And then you can start to bounce that back and forth in terms of the process where someone's really good at that. Let's just say the manager really knows sales. They've been very, very successful in our example. And they know they want their people to learn these 5 major areas.
Yeah.
Initiation.
So is this essentially the course outline now? You're starting.
This is sort of, we've considered all of our strategic pieces. We were wireframe for sort of resources. We understand that. We're stepping in now to say, well, you know what? If we're going down the rabbit hole here to say, let's talk about building the actual course, then suddenly, you do have to get sort of some suggestion of what those components are. Yeah. And then someone on their side is going to be taking those headers away. Those, if we talk about modules and lessons, if these are the modules of learning, and there may be many lessons underneath a module, they're taking those modules away and they're starting to write. They're starting to do their imaginary process, their blue sky process, and they want to see kind of what goes in there and how do we do that. At the same time, again, depending on who was in the room, back to the wireframe piece, we're pulling in any of the branding elements that are needed. So your company has a look and feel. That certainly needs to be known by the e-learning provider in terms of what that looks like. What are the expectations in terms of level of quality? We can go out, if you've got the budget and you can shoot for weeks and weeks and weeks, you can make a movie if you wanted to. Not many people do. I'm saying that is sure possible. It gets exciting, but boy, oh boy, those budgets are a bit bigger. So somewhere there's a compromise in between. Do we want some solid animation? You know what I mean? Again, when I think about your experience, you're a great person to talk to about ranges. You have that great document that you've got about those ranges of animation. You want to do basic, it's this. You want to do complex, it's this. So then you're getting those things back into your wireframe. Down the modules and lessons. Now what's happening is someone internally is good at, they're the subject matter expert, they know what they're doing. They're starting to put some basic bones on those things. And they're starting to actually say, well, if I'm going to teach this big concept, I need to teach these lessons in the end. Yeah. And what I've seen for signature courses is typical 5-module, typical, you know what I mean? Like an introduction module, your core concepts are coming in the middle 3 modules. There's maybe a wrap-up module and a resource section in a typical sort of layout of things. Yep. And you've worked through that. Now you've got suddenly modules, you've got headers, you've got things you want to do. Then you start to get into a back and forth with your provider who's guiding you on the writing to be able to say, okay, that's module number 2. We're going to talk about first meeting with a client, back to our sales example. Well, what are the components of that? What does it look like? Then you're getting reflection back to say, because the subject matter expert they'll know all the knowledge, but then they're getting reflection back to say, well, let's put this into a 2-minute lesson. Let's put that into a 3-minute lesson. Suddenly you're breaking it all down and you actually will understand the full structure of the course that you're intending to do. This then allows for a real production schedule to emerge in terms of allowing that piece to go forward and get things done. So that's kind of the basic aspects. You can imagine you've got,
I really appreciate you walking us through that. And one thing that I would add in there too is that in some cases, knowledge checks are necessary or desirable. In some cases, they're not. It really depends on the type of content. And so I know you didn't touch on that in particular, but that would be something that I would mention is as you're developing out the content and those lessons, like it's a 2-minute or a 3-minute lesson and so on, you're breaking them into those. Oftentimes a good break point that I find is when you want to insert a knowledge check. So if you're covering off a really important piece of information, it's important, I think, when we're developing it, is to usually insert those knowledge checks right immediately after that content, as opposed to waiting till, it's a 10-lesson chapter or module and you do all of your knowledge checking at the end. I like to insert them more throughout. And so that creates nice breaks as well, because then they're leaning in. And so this is one thing that I love about e-learning is that, and I speak to this a bit in terms of, just video. If you're just watching a YouTube video and learning about something on YouTube or taking a course that way, you're sitting back and you're watching, right? But what we want to do is we want people to be leaning in so that they're learning, they're more engaged then. And every time that you have a knowledge check, forces them to lean into the material, lean in and think about what it is, process it, answer a few questions, give the brain a bit of a break from watching the video content or reading the content if you're doing that style, and then move on to that next lesson. And so it works really good. And by knowledge check, I mean a quiz. And there's lots of different kinds of quizzes too. So we do a lot of interactive ones in which they have to move things around on a screen or click on certain aspects that they need. So as an example, if it's a safety video, and so maybe it's a safety orientation in which a new employee is going to be operating this piece of equipment. And so what we would do is maybe have images of that piece of equipment or a video of that piece of equipment. And so we have a full 360 of it. And so there might be different alerts or different things that we want to call out on that image. And so as they're rotating it or as the video is walking through, they can pause it and they can click on the different spots that they're supposed to identify as being key parts for maintenance or whatever the case might be, right? Or a hazard for getting injured. And so if they miss one, well, then they're asked to redo it. So that's a nice, engaging, interactive piece that acts as a knowledge check and makes them basically lean in and do something and activate a different part of their brain, which works really well.
Well, I totally agree. And I'm glad to see that you're, for the folks that are watching, painting out the possibilities, because a lot of times they're discovering that for the first time. And really where you've gotten to, which I get really excited about, is what is the best way for the student to learn this concept? Mm-hmm. And then when you're working with a good vendor, you've got a good chance to pick the right one, in a sense. Should this be a video? Should it be a photo? Like you said, should it be a click? Should I click on there and then have to go there? Should it be interactive? Should I see an animation? Can I go to the site and see it, or do I have to create something that goes in there? This is a really exciting part of the process, that if people can get back to those timelines that we were talking about, and you actually put aside the planning piece, there's also then, I'm going to say, a piece in here for the clients that are watching, the potential client people that are watching this, corporate, association, whatever. You have to get into being an imaginary type of person in those early planning stages. And I see this is another area of potential breakdown. So now you've just described it. You're like, hey, you know what? It could be this, this, or this. Well, sometimes people are in those meetings and they're nodding, but they haven't really seen it. So this then chance to go back and look at a body of work. Oh yeah, that's what I want it to be. But knowing that who you're dealing with is actually working from tried and true adult learning principles. That's exactly where you've gone with that. We don't want to staccato this thing. We can't fire hose the information. We know that e-learning retention, the percentage, you know what I mean, is sort of, it can be lower depending on the investment that you're making, but you know it's the best sort of hybrid in terms of what you're going for. So how do we then enhance our opportunity to get retention from the e-learning setting? And the gated piece that you've talked about, super critical in the corporate world, because then you know people have gone through, I mean, safety is an easy area to talk about, but really it applies to most settings in a corporate situation. When you're training, you want to know that they've got the knowledge and they've signed off. Yes, I do. They made it through that final exam for the e-learning, and they've got that body of knowledge. And the piece that I'll hear in there, to not make it sound punitive, is if they don't, if they've got what they've got from the course, they've also got a resource section in there so they know where to go to get the answer. And this gets back to the just-in-time piece. Yes, we can expect you to get through and know whatever, have an 80% success rate at the end of the knowledge check or exam scenario. But I think we also want to be working with our people kind of fluidly and just say, not only that, but check out the resource section, because you'll know that when you get into that situation again, if you need a refresher, you'll know that you'll go there to find what you need to be successful.
Yeah. The resource section is really important, and something that is definitely utilized and overlooked by a lot of our clients, actually. And because you can insert into the resource section, just for people who maybe aren't familiar with some of the different ways that you can structure an e-learning course, but you typically have got, a menu of lessons, modules, and quizzes, right? And that you can navigate through. And there'll oftentimes be a glossary of terms for people to be able to click on. So for instance, if something is being referenced within a video or referenced within the text on the e-learning course, that it's hyperlinked, or a little hot link or something like that alert pops up, so that people can then click on that and get that definition as to what that term maybe is. But the resource section is really powerful because you can have so many things, and like you mentioned, statutes and legislation references for safety training, those can be placed there. And then this course becomes something in which they come back to and visit regularly because they're accessing those resources. And so it just keeps them engaged and that e-learning kind of front and center within their lives, within their whether they're members or whether they're employees, right? So that's
totally.
really good.
I think, and I'm glad to hear that. Again, it's treating it like a living opportunity. Again, getting away from that old fatigue of doing it once and hoping that it lasts for a few years, and getting it into being a living, breathing, strategic digital asset that moves your strategic objectives forward. And that resource section becomes a really nice, flexible part of things. And back to lower costs these days, it's just a shame these days if someone doesn't do this type of planning, because then they have to redo their whole course. Doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense these days. You want to be able to think in an agile way where you can put things in, take them out,
Yeah.
make adjustments along the way. And again, if this thorough planning has been done up front, then you're in good shape. And the other piece is if you pick a good provider, you know what I mean? I'm going to go back to you guys again as well. And you know you're going to be in a partnership with them. That's certainly an investment on the corporate side, right? You want to work with the best people. You're either, I guess you could, some people try to in-house this thing. The in-house thing, it has mixed results depending on who you've got, but certainly larger corporations in-house this type of thing. For the folks that are looking for great providers, you're looking for someone to have a relationship with over time, and that creates a lot of the fluidity that you need so that when your money is getting spent, everyone's feeling good in the situation. No one's feeling like they're doing sort of too much or too little, and you've got a real partnership feel, and that's getting right back to, you're hearing words like partnership, investment, training, employee satisfaction on the association side, member satisfaction. We're getting those things to go forward, because what's crazy is once you get to do that first one, you do it right, you get a flavor and it gets properly sort of put out there in the world, you're going to be doing number 2, number 3, it's just inevitable that you'll be doing more in this area.
Yeah. Okay. So we're kind of getting to the top of the hour here. So what I'd like to do is just rapid fire a few. First off, I guess some challenges that you see or missteps or things that some of your clients, or when you come in after the fact and you're trying to clean it up, some things that people have done wrong, I guess. So the things that really, trip up a client when they are starting to go down the journey of creating e-learning. What would you say would be a couple? I've got a couple myself. Maybe we'll have the same ones. So
I think the big, so time and money, just as headers.
Sure.
When the experts, if you trust them, if you can, start to come in and start to say amounts of time. And you just said it earlier. If you think it's 6 months, it's going to get it done in 4 months with a bit of cushion. Don't try and run over those things with sort of pie-eyed expectations. If you want things done in 90 days, it's possible. It's just going to cost you more money in terms of getting them, actually out the door. But if you've got that proper breathing room to allow those things to occur. So the time piece really affects things like, what are the resources that we need internally? What do we need externally on the time side? Yeah. Are we fully budgeted before, during, and after?
Yeah.
Imagine, build, promote. Right? Are we fully budgeted for the whole cycle and maintain the maintenance piece down the road? Yeah. If those things can be there, I think that's really, really important. And invest in trust early. So that piece as a client, unless you want to learn the e-learning business, how do you trust? You trust your dentist sometimes. How do you trust this person to come in and really build with them and get it? So get a good referral into the situation, invest in trust early so that they can answer what you can understand, and then just admit that there's parts of the process that you're not going to understand. And I can't say enough about that trust piece being super important to avoid crucial conversations down the road or getting expectations out of whack and that kind of thing. And so I would say be holistic about your time, be holistic about the dollars that you're going to put into it, and don't start if those things aren't in place. It's the cheapest part of the process, that sort of vetting out a vendor. And are we going to hang out? Or do I want to spend 6 months with these people? Like, Lance with his dad jokes, like, am I ready for this? It's that kind of thing. But, and if not, just say no early. And I'm good with that. I would rather do that. The other piece I'll say also is this is something I introduce in my work these days. Instead of biting off a signature program, what's possible to create what I'm going to call a minimum viable product. And in there, it's a very simple process where you're trying to get like a 30-day sprint basically in the situation. And you want to be able to talk to your customers, find 3 to 6 of them, interview them, see what their real pain points are, and then know if this idea that you have for an e-learning, maybe it's with your internal employees, is really going to hit the mark. Because when you get that real feedback, a lot of people don't do that one step. Yeah. Get a little survey together, actually talk to real people, get the input back from that minimum thing, and then produce something. Get your subject matter expert to produce like a little 5-minute video, send it out to them and get their feedback. And once you've got that in play, that's another great way to not get down the road and produce a full program, multiple modules, all this learning and this thing, only to find out later that your folks on the ground aren't going to really have a big uptake on it,
Yeah.
or your membership is not going to be excited about your big program that you thought was going to be really good.
Yeah.
Cool part about when you do that, you're going to hear great ideas about the real pain points. You're going to hear great ideas about what the title of the program could be, the feedback you never imagined when you're in a little bubble kind of trying to make it up. So I can't say enough about, again, a minimum viable part of the process, and get really good at being at that piece and get it going. Because then when you walk in to do your full thing, you'll be better informed.
Yeah, and actually, just to feed off of that a little bit, I would recommend too, when you build out your e-learning, is to have a way for people to assess it afterwards. So the people who have gone through it, we want to get their feedback. And so at the end of that, you can have a little survey that pops up, ask them a few questions around the things that they liked, their level of satisfaction with it. Did it hit on the right things? Was there things that were missing? And so that things that are missing part could be additional modules. And this is another thing that's really great about e-learning, is that there's a lot of flexibility to add additional modules or additional lessons into it. And if you take Gord's module approach in terms of like creating everything into these small bite-sized pieces, essentially, so those 2-minute lessons, well, if a lesson isn't resonating, you can yank that out and replace it with something else, or expand upon it, redo it if necessary. And so there's different ways.
And what you just said is going to save people a bucket of money, whether they understand what you just said or not. It's just this thing of like being able to take those things out moving forward. You also said something that's really important. If you can have the maturity around this, especially on a large corporate investment, to say this is version 1.
Yes.
And we're going to be ready to invest in version 2. And we know that our e-learning process can take place over multiple versions, not like a one-stop only, it's got to be perfect. Yeah. That's a really interesting way to work. It's ties back to your own organizational continuity expectations, right? We're in it for the long haul. We want our employees to really learn. We're going to listen to them when they say that piece is off or that's not working. You get that muscle going, this gets superstar level, and it really it will drive your bottom line. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So another one that challenge that I see a lot of our clients stumble on is on the content side of things. And so I just want to throw out a quick tip there. So when it comes to the content writing, usually what we find is that when a client says that they're going to be providing the content, we end up having to do a tremendous amount of writing or editing to it as well. And so keep that in mind. If you don't have a writer on your staff, you've got a subject matter expert maybe, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be able to write it, right? And you might have a social media person, or you might have a marketing person, but to do course writing, it's a different skill set than to do marketing writing or any other types of business writing. And so what you want to do, if you can, is incorporate that into your planning process as well, so you don't stumble there, because that's oftentimes where we see the biggest delay is if they're providing us with the content, we will go through multiple iterations, and it takes them, and it's quite painstaking for them to go through it and to build out all those elements properly so that it works for e-learning.
Those are wise words. If people just stopped right here and only rewound like back to that one piece as being sort of the big pig in the python for the whole process, the question, I'll just add in and support what you're saying and say, what's the best way to get the best out of our subject matter expert? Because then it'll be your financial expert. They don't even remember what they don't know. Do you know what I mean? They can simply rattle it off, or the sales expert or the safety expert, whoever that is, they're really good at what they do. How do we showcase them in the best way possible? And I've had moments where you're like, well, go off and type on a keyboard. And you find out later, well, they don't really like to type. Like they literally run into those types of moments. So how do you extract from them? And I can't say enough also about being a little bit open to ways to do it. So have a Zoom call, record the Zoom call, get a transcript from the Zoom call, and then go back and review the transcript and pull out the best ideas. Those simple ways of getting the best out of them to make them look great and not expect them to be technical writers or, final content writers. It's really not. It is, like you said, I can't say it enough. I can't agree more. It's a skill set in and of itself, but we want them to look great.
Yeah. And just to build on that a little bit, another area that we see people struggle is when they are providing the footage, right? And so then we're taking and incorporating that footage in. So if we're not the ones filming it, the camera presence, it can be very different. You might have somebody that can speak in a meeting really well, who is really gifted on the phone or whatever, or maybe even in a conversational Zoom conference call. But as soon as you start throwing them in front of a computer or a camera lens, and they have to hit these points, it's not just a rambling on conversation. These are the key points in the outline. That can be really challenging for people. And so oftentimes we'll see our clients then try to use a teleprompter. That sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work as well. And so the subject matter expert might not actually be the person that you want to have on camera as well. So think that through as well. It's not something that is required. What you need is somebody that can communicate the content well. The subject matter expert is the person who's providing that content guide, but they don't necessarily have to be the person that's in front of the camera. So don't try to force them into something that they're not comfortable with, or that they just don't have any experience with and are really struggling with that. So I think it's really important to think through the delivery piece of it as well.
And I'll step on that for just a second and force it and say, what is the best way that the student is going to learn this material?
Yeah.
And it's a disaster when you've got somebody on camera where you're thinking about their performance. Suddenly you're not thinking about the subject, right?
Yeah. Yeah, or vice versa. They're thinking of the subject too much. And that's where I see it actually more probably happen than the other way, is that they're trying to remember the point they're trying to hit, and they get too caught up in that and they lose their camera presence. And so then you've got a really unengaging person speaking to the learner, and the learner then will really struggle to stay.
Well, and I'll just jump in on engagement. These days in our video-driven world, right? On our phones every day.
Yeah.
Everybody knows engagement, and they immediately know when they're not being engaged. Yeah. So you just said, here's a pitfall. Don't expect your subject matter expert to be the one on camera. It's a great thing. Or just test drive them. Don't even make a big commitment. Just get out the phone, see if they can deliver. And if they can, good. And if not, get immediately into a conversation about, well, that's great subject matter, but how do we deliver it? What's the best? Who can deliver it the best? Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wanted to go back to another great point that you'd made, just with regard to the timeline and everything else, and the budgeting of the time appropriately, and how that is one of the core things that you see people challenged with. And so what we do when we sit down with a client, we work out, what that timeline and each deliverable, and then the tasks that are associated with each deliverable, what those need to be in order for us to hit that delivery date. And so you go with your desired delivery date, you work your way backwards, and then you realize, holy crap, I've got only a week to do this particular task, which I know is going to take 2 weeks or more or whatever. And you got a few of those sprinkled in there. Your timeline is not going to be appropriate. So either you have to trim down the amount of content you're creating, or the complexity of the e-learning, which then potentially reduces then the impact of it, as well as the engagement level and so on. So I typically, encourage people not to do that, because that's paramount. So then you look at, okay, how do we extend this deadline out? Or, which I really loved your point about doing it version 1, version 2, version 3. And so version 1 maybe has only got modules 1 and 2 in it, even though you have a 5-module course that you want to have eventually created, right? So you do module 1 and 2, you get those out the door, and while people are learning those modules, you can be producing. It kind of buys you time to do it in stages, and you can still be rolling it out. You don't have to have the whole course created in eLearning in order to roll out different modules or lessons. So I think
this is really sage advice. And again, having been in those rooms with good intentions, whiteboards are filled up with dates and times and a lot of arrows and all that kind of stuff, or Gantt charts for people that know those, or you lay it out with good intentions. I can say honestly to the people that are watching this, many people sit in those meetings, they look at them, they sign off on them, but they don't know what they're reading. Yeah. And so a provider, and again, someone builds your house, they're going to say, here's the timelines, here's the thing, the doors are coming on this day, and E-learning is no different. There's just sort of these gated things that need to occur. Hard part for the client is they don't understand the process. So when I say, we're going to have to do some voiceover here, and then we're going to have to re-voice over when the first voiceover has parts that are problematic. And that's just going to happen just because the pronouncer got wrong, or you didn't like the read, or whatever that is. It's very difficult for folks to grasp that along the way when they're looking at it on those documents filled out. So if they're really interested in investing the patience and the time that it takes to truly understand the timeline, then really good. Then learn all those things. And this is back to this trust element of, am I working with the right provider? I don't have time to sort of dig into all that minutiae. They've told me it's this, therefore I think it's that. The other piece I'm going to say, going both ways, is there's always an asterisk, because you were mentioning earlier, like maybe someone's sick or they're not available or whatever those things are. This is where you've built in that healthy contingency of, I wanted it in 90 days. They're telling me it's 180 days just in case. Am I going to really be okay at 180 days? No, I've got to have it in 90 days. I mean, we could be talking about a construction project, or it's the same. It's the same, right? Like, how do you trust who you're dealing with to know that when they're putting those marks in those moments, they're doing that in your best interest. They're not trying to shortchange you or anything like that. So there's a trust element here for sure.
Yeah, completely. Okay, well, thank you so much, Gord. I really appreciate you sharing the expertise and all your knowledge here today. And I think our audience has definitely got some great takeaways that they can use then when they start thinking about, do I use e-learning instead of face-to-face? And if I do, what are the things that I need to think about when I first start that? So,
well, and thanks for that summary, and great to be here. And it's funny about, do I use e-learning? It's not a choice anymore for leaders. It's, when do I use e-learning? How much of it do I incorporate? How much of it do I incorporate into my ecosystem? And that's a whole other, webinar that we would do here together. But I just think it's a matter of getting in, but get in the right way. Get in with the right people. Find those right providers to help you go along in that healthy way. Build those trust relationships, and you can hear the vision of what this becomes. We've talked a lot about tactical and practical here today. Honestly, this will drive your workforce. Your workforce will drive your profitability. This will drive your membership retention. It will drive their engagement level. So if you're on the association side, and then that's where your focus is, I mean, and then once people start to get energy back from what goes out in the world and the feedback starts to come back to your organization, there's a multiplier effect for this as well. So getting this sort of, out of the gate in the right way, you've got unlimited runway for how far it will go. You've got unlimited things to teach. This is the thing about all organizations. They've got all kinds of things they need to teach to their people. This is why I get really excited in this space, because again, they can get it done, get out of there with that good experience in that early days, and then start to map out year 1, year 2, year 3. One of my favorite things, and maybe I'll just leave this here on the vision piece as we're at the end here, is for some of your clients, what would be the name of your online school? I love asking that question, because then it starts to make them think, and they start to mull that in the back of their head. Big smiles come up, and they're like, oh, we could do this and we could do that. That starts to become a really nice, interesting, imaginary piece that will lead to the proper before, during, and after investment of time and money to help make e-learning, progress successful.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. And for those who want to get in touch with you, how would they find you?
Gord at experttrainingsolutions.com. Simple email if they want to reach out there. And look forward to hearing from anybody if they've got any questions about the process or anything like that. And can't say enough about what you're doing. And again, folks, I don't know if folks know when they watch these things, they'll see a couple guys like this, whatever, and you've earned your hair loss or whatever it is. It takes decades to sort of build up to this level of acumen. And I'm going to say for Lance, in terms of all the different things that he can do, some folks can do 1 or 2 of these things: animation, e-learning, video production. They'll specialize in those areas. Yeah. For what Amplo is doing, from what I understand, they're in all those areas. And then Lance bolts that in with this same strategic planning. So there's that sense of having your back through the process. That's the type of provider I want to be able to refer to. I can guarantee it. I look for there's so much need in the world. I end up working with multiple people in terms of relationships like this. But when you find somebody of quality, it's easily worth getting on the phone and going, what did Gord mean when he said that? And start to build those relationships. And that's, again, that little part at the beginning that will allow that growth, all those things we're talking about envisioning, to go forward in the future.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap. So we just finished up this episode on e-learning. And if you want to check out any of our other episodes of Amplify Your Business, head over to amplimedia.com/amplify, and you'll see all the archived episodes there that walk you through all sorts of different marketing challenges and other tips and advice on how you can become a better business person, better business owner, and a more successful business owner, more importantly. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.